That will recall. There you go. I am on camera apparently now as we speak. Move that microphone back there. Oh, arthritic knees sound the same way as that coil, the springs on that particular microphone. What I have done is we had for a number of years a camera that was mounted on one of the corner walls here. We have very high ceilings, and so people could tune in and look at a video, but they would see the host or the guests off in the distance. And it's funny because there's a TV monitor in the room as well, and sitting atop that is a little red wagon. I mean, it is really little. But from the scope of the vantage point that people had of seeing these videos, they saw this big red wagon. And I used to get all of these questions from people who were listening saying, "What's the deal with the wagon?" I don't know. Somehow, Kelly and Jill thought it was a good idea to put it up there. I never got an explanation. You know, the 2 days I spent with them, I never really got into those details, how they decorated the studio. We talked about other things that I thought were much more critical to the actual show. So we have a couple of different cameras now that we have. One is sitting right here on the top of the console that I'm facing. And the great thing about that is people will now be able to look at me and say, "Gee, I didn't realize he was that fat." But that's the great thing about having the camera closer. You can also see every bit of nub on my face, pockmark, but you can also see my Washington Nationals hat, of which I own 20 some. And whenever they have a losing streak, I just switch the hat, put on a new one, and that usually remedies things, such as the spanking they gave to the New York Yankees yesterday. There are certain evil things in sports. The New York Yankees, Dallas Cowboys, and Philadelphia Flyers, all tools of the devil. So it was a good day yesterday. Now, speaking of that, we're off on a tangent this morning. We don't normally do a lot of that. 65 outside. We should point out inside it's probably about the same because we have had some air conditioning issues, and in order to remedy those, it's somewhat chilly inside the building as well. 9 minutes after 8 o'clock, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX. Ken Menzel from the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Department will join us in about 20 minutes. He normally comes by and has just some very quick tips on people who are wanted. Maybe even don't know they have a warrant out for their arrest. He passes those things along. And sometimes we talk some safety issues while he's in studio with us as well. Following Ken's visit, we'll have a guest who will tell us how we can support people like Ken and other people who are working in law enforcement. We have a guest who I met last week, and we were talking via email over the last few days, and his organization is putting together a Support Our Police initiative in the state of Idaho. And so he would like to talk a little bit about that this morning, and that's in relation to what's going on in some other parts of the country. As Bill O'Reilly put it, I think in the last couple of nights on his program, a war on police. We'll get to that a little later in the show as well, but first, I had a couple of things I wanted to share with you. Speaking of the environment in this building, where, as I said, it is slightly chilly today, and you just heard, if you were listening to the Fox newscast just before I hit air, there was a discussion, and the fellow was saying, he's from the oil industry, if we cut off oil right now, which is what your environmentalist wants you to do, that we can't survive on the granola. He said half the world would be dead in a year. And we've been warning these people, and they just, when you tell them that, then they look at you kind of blank, and then they sit for a few seconds, benumbed, and then they come back with, "Well, we cannot go on following the environment." Yes, but you're saying that because you're worried you're going to kill billions of people. Well, yes. Well, if we take your approach, we'll kill them right away. Oh, well, we can't go on but just spoiling the environment. No, you're not hearing me. If you do what you want to do, you're going to kill off half of humanity. Are you the first volunteer to go in order that someone else may survive? Oh, no, I'm going to stick around and instruct people how to eat their granola. That's what you get out of the folks. The environmental, well, I won't go out and say they're wackos. They're just plain nuts. But we have a story today coming out of Idaho, and I wanted to share it quickly. A Texas oil company having trouble with mineral rights holders in western Idaho who have refused to sign leases is asking Idaho officials to step in so plans to drill for natural gas or oil can move forward. Now, here's my question for you. Can you deny someone mineral rights when the minerals are beneath your property? Well, first of all, sometimes these companies, my dad told me this story. My dad grew up, at least until he was 9 years old, in northwestern Pennsylvania, in that area just east of Erie, Pennsylvania. And that was where oil first really got kicked off in this country. That's where John D. Rockefeller first started making his fortune, those oil fields that were in northwestern Pennsylvania and the southwestern corner of New York. And so my dad was very familiar with the concept of mineral rights. And he told me, he said, sometimes those are more important than property rights. And he had said that when he was a kid growing up, mineral rights trumped your property rights. So he told me, if you ever have an opportunity to buy those before you buy the land. He said it'll be much more profitable. Then you could go back and pay whatever price they want for the property above it that faces the sky. Houston-based Alta Mesa Holdings filed applications this week to begin a process called integration. That's a recently revised process the Idaho Oil and Gas Conservation Commission can use when a minority of mineral rights holders decline to take part in developing a potentially profitable oil or gas field. This is the first time the new process approved by Idaho lawmakers earlier this year is being used. The Oil and Gas Conservation Commission selected its chairman Wednesday to preside over procedural matters involving the applications. So there's a showdown coming. There's a showdown coming between the people who would like to, well, there's obviously something beneath the soil there, and it looks to be natural gas, which is a clean-burning fuel. And the United States is sitting atop so much of that, the rest of the world combined is probably wondering, how come we can't have any of that? But the question is, the people who actually are living on that land or farming or ranching on that land, they may well have an argument, yeah, but this is going to be disruptive to what I'm doing. So how can we work all of this out? It's 8:13, and if you'd like to reach the program, you can call 736-0300. Also, you can drop me an email at bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. I believe we have our first telephone caller of the morning. You're on the air on News Radio 1310 KLIX.
Yeah, good morning, Bill. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
You know, what you just said about environmentalists, exactly right. They're psycho. They've lost their freaking minds thinking everybody needs to live this way. And so I'd like to remind them of something. Them and their government are the idiots that just sent live anthrax all over the damn world.
Yes.
You know, and I'm going to sit here and have them tell me I can't drive my diesel pickup because it's going to hurt the environment. I mean, these guys are idiots.
Just take a moment and think about that. If the government has all of that anthrax, what are the plans for it?
Yeah, exactly. And why are they shipping it all over the world? But all you got to have is one accident. I mean, imagine if it was an airplane crash, you probably burn up the anthrax. But have one accident with that crap, and everybody's screwed. But they're going to sit here and worry about me mowing my grass with a gas mower? I mean, what they need to do is just shut up. Go back in their little cave. If they don't want to live in the environment, go into a cave, bury the door shut, and live there. I don't care.
Yes, then they can.
God, how they can't expect 747s to get off the ground without oil.
You know what? And thank you for the call. Yeah, I saw that yesterday. A bulletin came into my email inbox from the Washington Times, and the EPA now is trying to regulate the fumes coming out of the back of jet planes, which could kill. Well, that way they can get their beloved trains all over the country, and then bike paths. And you know, one of the reasons we don't have any money for highways is because your federal government is spending it all on trails and bike paths. You can make that on your own. I love his thought about having the liberals. Well, okay, let's not call them liberals. We'll just call them environmentalists. Oh, I know. It's the same thing. But let's go have them live in caves. They'd like that, wouldn't they? And also they could be eaten by the brown bear and by the wolves if they move off towards the national park. They could obviously commune with nature, and they could become part of it. And then they could be recycled as far as what you might call fertilizer after they've been eaten. And this way, the wolves wouldn't have to attack people's cattle either. So we would solve a couple of problems because the wolves would be, fattened up on all of that beautiful, well, never mind. Somebody will say, that's eliminationist rhetoric. Well, you want to kill off half the planet to satisfy your belief that if we all just have a few more pinwheels blowing in the wind, that somehow everything will be hunky-dory. Meanwhile, OPEC, trying to put the United States energy industry out of business, led by Saudi Arabia, supposed to be our ally, right? Yeah, they go around lashing people for having opinions that run counter to Sharia law. They have been trying by lowering their price. Did you know that OPEC, the Saudis, could make a profit by selling oil for $5 a barrel? Yeah, and so it was $80 a barrel was the break-even point in the big deposits out in the Dakotas. However, a guy by the name of Arthur Herman, who has a background in energy exploration, is writing today at Washington Examiner, and he says the Saudis' move is backfiring. You know what happened? What happens in a capitalistic culture when something like that comes along? Well, the people who are actually drilling for the oil and natural gas in the Dakotas and various places, they have discovered cheaper ways to do it, and they may end up bringing their prices so far down, they'll put the Saudis out of business. The USA, by the way, saw it a couple of days ago. We have surpassed Russia now as the world's leading oil producer. You're on the air next with Bill Colley on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX. It's 8:17.
Yeah, good morning, Bill. Well, it all amounts to is that the EPA has even admitted that with all these stringent restrictions on coal, and even they're going after natural gas, anything with carbon, it's not going to make any difference, and there's only 800 gigatons of CO2 in the atmosphere. There's 40,000 in the ocean. So it's the temperature drives the CO2. The CO2 does not drive the temperature. So, they always have it 180 degrees wrong. But I agree with the previous caller. These guys have cost us trillions of dollars in regulations.
By the way, you're a very dangerous man. You just cited some actual numbers there, and they hate that because they hope that everyone is so dumbed down in our school systems that when they tell them that the sky is falling, they'll just take it, take the word for it instead of actually saying, well, wait a minute, I have these numbers to refute you.
Yeah, well, that's just it. They don't want to deal with real science. They have a control agenda coming right through Agenda 21 from the United Nations. We need to get out of that sinister, tyrannical organization, which is, pushing all these trade agreements and all this kind of nonsense.
Amen. Thank you much for the call. Got about a minute before our break coming up. He brought up a point about how it works on the other side. If you receive the Daily Signal, which comes from I believe the Heritage Foundation is the source of that, and I've mentioned it before, I signed up for it a few months ago, and I get a daily email from Daily Signal, and what I do is before showtime, I have an opportunity. There's usually 3 stories. Well, again, we're talking about a populace that doesn't have a very long attention span, so 3 quick stories, and they're all about the length of the typical newspaper column, maybe even shorter. But this morning, one of them included a video, and it's from a young man who has written a book talking about how the other side tries to shut down debate. And they don't like it if you start bringing up figures and other things like that. And he said because they can't come up with an explanation. They have no ability to come back. So they just scream either racism or bigotry, or they've always got some line like that to try and shut people down. But it's beginning to fall apart. Jerry Seinfeld was on a television show and also a radio show this week. The comedian, many of whom you know from his TV show many, many years ago. And he was very blunt about it, saying that he can't make certain jokes anymore, which used to be some of the funniest parts of his repertoire. And he's often criticized by people even in the audience when he makes the jokes, and they immediately say, you need to apologize. He says it's time to get over it. When his own 14-year-old daughter was told by his wife, in a couple of years we can take you into the city so you can meet some boys, the daughter says that's sexist. And Seinfeld said she doesn't even know what she's talking about. She's just been conditioned to say that. You may have missed it yesterday if you had some errands to run and perhaps couldn't have the radio on, but we had our episode of Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine between 8:30 and 9 o'clock yesterday morning. Dr. Jonathan Tripp and his wife dropped in. She's the office manager, and we talked about insurance issues. Next Wednesday, you still have an opportunity to touch base with the medical professionals from Tripp Family Medicine. We're going to be talking about, the topic is fun in the sun, but also what you need to know. For instance, when you're out in the sun a lot, how much should you be drinking? What do they always say? Drink plenty of fluids, as if you're some sort of an automobile. Well, they mean, they mean water, maybe some juices, things like that. So that'll be the topic this coming Wednesday, this next week, between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. We do this every week. Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine, located, of course, in Twin Falls, across from the main post office on Fillmore Street. And we always like to remind you what they say at Tripp Family Medicine, and that is, life's too short not to feel good. Story that I happened to see on the AP Wire this morning. AP is really a news aggregator. That is, much like the Drudge Report, they pick up stories from other places, usually from their members. And the members often are newspapers, radio stations, and television stations across the state of Idaho and elsewhere around the country. This story today on AP, credited to the Times News. Margaret Boucher's beloved Border Collie mix is living with another family after a series of, they still write in a very cliche sense, mishaps. We had a boss I used to work for who would not let you use the word mishap. He said, people don't sit, if you walk into a diner, somebody doesn't say, I had a mishap last night. They say they had an accident. But the writer goes on to say, she says she desperately needs her friend back. And according to the newspaper, the dog Hazel ran away while temporarily staying in a friend's home and was picked up by animal control, then adopted by a new family, all before Boucher, or Boucher in French, even knew the dog went missing. She says Hazel is not only a beloved canine friend, but also a medical assistant. So the Twin Falls Animal Shelter says the problem is out of their hands. They say adoptions are final and confidential. So somebody out there has her dog, and if you have a big heart, you might think about returning that animal. This is obviously a problem in that sense. What are people supposed to do? I mean, it's not her fault. And again, the animal is apparently trained to assist with her because of a heart condition. And yet the animal shelter, somebody apparently picked up the dog, brought it in. And, I was on the subject of dogs yesterday. Just very quickly, if I could add something to this. You're listening to Bill Colley on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Our time is 8:26, and I should point out 67. Won't be quite as hot as it was a couple of days ago. The heat returns, though, starting the beginning of next week. Here's the thing. If you were with me at the end of the program yesterday, I was telling you the story. There are a group of cats that hang around the radio station. Some of them may be feral, that is wild. I mean, they don't have homes. Most of them, though, appear to be neighborhood cats who are well taken care of. They come back and they're brushed out every day. And so what we've done is we've ended up setting up a feeding station. And what we do is in the morning we go out, we put some food in some dishes, and the cats usually line up. There were 3 of them there this morning. Sometimes there are as many as 5. Sometimes you go back out during the lunch hour. There's a couple of different ones. But we've gotten to know who most of them are. And there was one that had been around the longest, and he was named Marvin by the staff. Big, fluffy, furry guy with big ears and, hair coming out of his ears. And just, if you probably shaved him, he wouldn't have been that big. But he lived in the barn across the parking lot and apparently lived there for at least 10 years. He may have been older. We don't know. I mean, no one really knows his history. And he was not what you'd call, you could not pick him up and, he wouldn't cuddle with you. But one of my coworkers could actually reach out and touch him and pet him while he was eating. Marvin got torn apart by a dog over the weekend. And we found his remains behind the barn. And people here weren't terribly happy about that. And I know that people say dogs aren't dangerous. It's people making their dogs dangerous. The compression that a pit bull has with its mouth is so intense. It's not like being bitten by a chihuahua, that's for sure. It's not like being bitten by even a shepherd. It is a vicious bite. And I am sick to death of hearing people defend this notion that they have to have those dogs. For what reason? To what purpose? A border collie is much more intelligent and would be much better with your children and with your family and keeping an eye on things because it's nature. It would keep an eye on everything, hurting everything around the home. But we have people in the neighborhood. One of the things about the neighborhood here at the radio station, and I'm going to go out on a limb here and tell you, I'm not real pleased by the people who live on opposite ends of it. In the middle, you have some really nice complexes, new homes. But I've got to tell you, what I see, you'd think you were up in the hills of Appalachia. And I know this because I grew up there. But some of the animals, the dogs that they have, and then this notion that they have to let them run free, it absolutely perplexes me because you know better. You don't want your neighbor's dog running free, but somehow you think that your dog should run free. And then it goes around the neighborhood tearing up harmless cats. I don't know that I approve of that. And frankly, if you're doing that, you're the scum of the earth. And I don't have any apologies for saying that. There are some reasons that we have leash laws. And I understand people, well, Bill, if you're a libertarian, how can you say that? Because what you're doing, when your animal starts interfering with things on my property or with my family or with the animals that we have, then you've crossed the line. And I really do believe, and we had a city councilor who had a similar situation happen. Her cat was torn up in front of her face. She looked out the window and there was one of these nasty pit bull dogs just ripping the cat to shreds. Somebody's got to do something about this soon. I'll tell you what. I mean, it's completely out of hand, and these people who have to have them as the gangsters had them first, and now you've got all of these, back in the 80s they were called yuppies, those types of people. Now they think they have to have them as status symbols. You see them walking them on the trail over by the canyon, and sometimes the dog will lunge at you, and they have to struggle to hold that dog back. You people really need to start thinking about, the dangers that are on the end of that leash. It's 8:30. 67. Bill Colley with you. News Radio 1310 KLIX. NewsRadio1310.com. Ken Menzel coming up next. Our guest joining us in studio is, he's with us sometimes as many as 3 times in a month. Just depends on where the calendar falls, because sometimes there are 5 Thursdays in the month. Ken Menzel is with the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Department. First of all, welcome back.
Thanks. Good morning, Bill. How are you?
Good. We were just talking off air for a couple of minutes about, just some safety issues, but also something going on this weekend, which might be a good teaching tool as well when it comes to safety.
Absolutely. The Sheriff's Office is hosting their 4th annual off-road fair with off-road vehicles, four-wheelers, dirt bikes, UTVs and whatnot up in the South Hills. We've done this now. I'm not sure if this is our 5th or 4th year, but it's always a good time. Our Lieutenant Darren Brown with the Range Division and several of his range deputies go up along with the Idaho Department of Parks and Rec, and they put on a safety fair to help our younger off-road enthusiasts learn what's necessary to be safe out on the trails up in the South Hills or on forest trails or just basically anywhere you're at. In lieu of some of the tragic experiences that we've had this week, we had a young man that tragically lost his life in a four-wheeling accident, and it's just a good reminder with this time of year to be safe. There's a lot of people out there enjoying the waterways and the trails this time of year, and we just encourage a lot of people that are going to go out to remember that there's a lot of people out there on the waterways or on the trails, and to be cognizant of that.
8:35. Call it 68. Bill Colley with Ken Menzel in our studio. It's News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com. Of course, that means you can hear us anywhere all over the world online by just clicking on Listen Live, and the show is top story. You have mentioned that boating regulations, sometimes people are so excited to get out there, they tend to forget.
They do.
That there are other people out there, too.
I was out there on the waterway just this weekend on a kayak, and we were at Centennial Park, and as we were struggling to get up to Pillar Falls, if you will, a couple boats came by going at least 35, 40 miles an hour, just threw a wake all over the place, and I could see that there were several other kayakers out there with us that weren't impressed. Just remember that you've got a lot of kayakers down at Centennial. Oftentimes it's difficult to even put a boat in and even put it in gear hardly without bumping into somebody. Just remember that a significant wave can create a lot of problems with that many non-motorized vessels out there on the waterway. When you do approach a kayak, you need to give them 100 feet no wave area when you go past them. And a lot of people forget that. They just get in the boat and run up to Pillar Falls so they can do their fishing or sunbathing or whatever it is. But you notice that a lot early on in the season. People forget their life jackets, or they forget to check their fire extinguisher and make sure that it's fully charged. Just slow down and take a minute to take a look at your safety equipment and to remember that everybody out there on the waterway wants to be respected, and give them that respect they need.
It's when you talk about that, we've been over this a few times now that the weather is really hot. People are going to be outside a lot, just looking for ways to cool off. So, you have cyclists who are all over the roads. You've got people out on their ATVs. You've got people boating. You've got people hiking. And, of course, in each case, there's a lot of people out on their motorbikes, too, as well. So in each case, there's always a unique and individual problems that can arise in all of this.
Absolutely, and we're an agricultural community, so you see a lot of their farmers and their ranch hands out there on their ATVs changing water and herding cows and whatnot. And everywhere you go, you see people just engaged in life. You see off-road vehicles on the highway as well, just doing what we do here in the Magic Valley, and that's just taking care of business. Whether it's our agriculture or whether it's people recreating, just slow down and take your time.
I was going to say, this time of year, too, you've got a lot of people out there with their tractors.
Yeah.
And sometimes outsiders don't realize that's part of the business atmosphere around here.
You see 15, 20 cars stacked up behind a tractor with a hay rake on it, and people start to get frustrated and start passing over double yellow lines or passing in a lane that's designated for something else. And it's just part of doing business. You're right.
I was going to say, remedial, sometimes classes would help people out, but
Yeah,
you can't send everyone to a remedial class.
Right. No, who has the time for a remedial class, right?
Hey, a couple of other things. This weekend's event, it'll go on throughout the weekend?
Yeah, it'll be on Saturday and Sunday. If you have any questions, feel free to contact the Sheriff's Office, 736-4110. You can get more information on the exact times that class will be up there, but it's open to anybody. Bring your equipment, bring your helmets. They'll check to make sure the helmets fit properly and just go through basic riding and stuff to keep people safe.
That is, from what I understand, one of the most popular places for people to go because
It is.
you don't have to worry about a lot of traffic once you're up there.
Right. Well, it depends. Sometimes you can see quite a few people go up there on the weekends, but by and large, it's a great place to get away and just be to yourself.
I want to thank you for coming by. We'll talk again.
2 weeks.
2 weeks. Yeah, because we're almost, it's hard to believe that June is already nearly halfway
Can you believe
done.
that? Yeah, it's crazy.
Yes, Ken, every day my hair gets a little whiter.
So does mine.
Again, Ken Wenzel joining us this morning from the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Department. Speaking of law enforcers, we have a fellow coming up in a few minutes on the program with us. He's going to be joining us, and he's talking about a new project that is that they're working on. His organization is working on to offer support to police officers and law enforcers across the state of Idaho. He says we don't want a media circus like you're seeing in some other parts of the country to happen here. Details on that coming up at 68, 840. This is Top Story with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX.
I'd like to
and
get
News
to my
Radio
next guest
1310.com.
in just a moment, but first I wanted to share something with you. This is coming out of Florida, where a high school principal decided to post on his Facebook page that he supported the police officer in Texas who resigned and likely forced to resign his position after he pulled a gun while trying to take down a suspect and while being approached by some other people who were trying to interfere with the arrest. Guess what happened to the principal? He was transferred, yes, transferred to another job, and he may not ever be working with children again. Here's the reaction, though, from a teacher at his school.
He doesn't look at color. We all make mistakes. We all say things that we wish we could have taken back. We're not perfect. Just because he's a principal, that doesn't make him perfect. But as long as he was getting the job done, I think that's all that should matter.
Thank you. And that comes from a teacher who apparently comes from a minority background, and she's saying, "Hey, let's have some sanity about all of this. We don't want to see something like that happening, obviously, in the state of Idaho. We don't want the media attention here. We would like to project an image that we are peaceful people who are law-abiding." And joining us this morning on the program is Tom Munz. He is a coordinator with the John Birch Society in the state of Idaho. First of all, welcome to the program, sir.
Thanks, Bill.
I right off the top, I want to point out, too, as well, that your organization is trying to launch a program this summer that will simply raise the profile of law enforcers and really try to bring some more respect to the job that they're doing. I have that right, don't I?
You do have that right.
What is it that you have to do to make this happen?
Well, just first of all, just think of the irony of this. The John Birch Society has been labeled the foremost right-wing extremist hate group in the country, and with that would elude the fact that to the average law enforcement officer that's doing his duty, to be able to think that somehow that we are a threat to their lives. And the irony about that is that most people haven't thought clearly enough or looked deeply enough to realize that we were the only ones, and we're the foremost ones to push the Support Your Local Police initiative starting back in 1965 when they had the war against police. And so what due to the and I started this actually a year ago. I've been traveling the state, visiting with the sheriffs and visiting with police chiefs and every officer that would take time to talk to me. And I've really had some amazing results that have really been rather emotional for me. And it's something that I believe I'm in the right place. I'm getting some opposition from some of my libertarian friends, which is great because we're presently debating this issue on Facebook, and I'm really excited about it. I don't think there's anything anybody can do to make me change. Even though I do work for them, it's something that I have found really very deep in my heart, even before we started the initiative.
You mentioned something about the JBS, John Birch Society, and people saying it's a group of bigots and haters. But actually, as I understand it, the Southern Poverty Law Center, which tracks groups, says that's not the case at all. Of all people, they usually go after everyone that they don't like from the left, but they have made it clear that they view that the JBS is a society of patriots. So I guess at least there's finally some grudging respect going on for the organization.
Well, and if that's I'm looking at I'm going around the state passing out the original reprint, which is basically one of our small magazines on the Support Your Local Police initiative, and we've been on them pretty hard since, for as long as I've been around, as long as I can remember. And people can change their tune. They may recant particular statements they make, but the undermining feeling about who we are, I don't think will ever change just because they label anybody a right-wing extremist hate group for anybody that even disagrees with any of their single issues, whether it's just immigration or just guns or just abortion or just any of these issues.
I would imagine that there are some people in law enforcement, because of that, that publicly can't, really get on board with what you're doing, but behind the scenes are telling you, hey, thank you so much.
Well, when I first got involved in this, I actually had a sheriff that you would probably think would be least likely to be able to share this with me. But they said, Tom, you have to realize something. And this was kind of on the down low, and it was awesome that I got that kind of insight. They said, just because I'm sitting here in this chair on the clock, I have to share with you what my duty is on how I see things, but in reality, when I'm home, I think much differently, or, when I'm outside of wearing my particular hat, I think much differently. And I think when I first started, I was really surprised by that because I didn't realize, I didn't put myself in that kind of a position and really think about that. So that's really another issue that really helped me realize that communication is absolutely key in doing that, because it helps me understand that, sometimes when we get disgruntled, either whether we've got marital spats or we've got somebody cutting us off on the road or we've got a ticket or we've got a death in the family or whatever we have, the first altercation or the first, the first meeting that the average citizen has with law enforcement, unfortunately, is on the road, where we're thinking about a bunch of different things. And, they're the first people that usually get it. And so I think what it's important to do is to be able to remember to reteach our citizens that, these people, we want to have them look behind the badge. We want to have them realize that they're mothers and fathers and daughters and sons and all of those things. And that's all a big part of it.
It's coming up on 10 minutes away from 9 o'clock. It's 69. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com, and this is Top Story. Our guest is Tom Munns. He is the field coordinator for the John Birch Society in the state of Idaho. And, when you mention this, there does seem to be, I think, one thing that I guess JBS as well as certain talk show hosts would be accused of is having some sort of paranoia. But I have a belief that there is an effort, that is an organized effort, especially in media and academia, various places, to belittle the work that is done by our law enforcers, and that they have really found opportunities, whether they are good opportunities or not, in the past 12 months to do that around the country. How do we go about countering that? Because, there are a lot of young people out there right now who are given the impression that the police are nothing but a group of Gestapo agents.
Well, I think, everything around this campaign is basically launched on the simple fact that we would prefer local law enforcement to keep them independent rather than the nationalization of police. Now, within that, and my knowledge and my passion for what I do, of course, I can go much, much deeper into different issues. We're not going to deny, I do mention the word Constitution. I am taught by many, many law enforcement officers that have confirmed that the Post Academy not only teaches them that they're going to be going home in body bags, but teaches them to be very, very leery of people that even use the word Constitution without them even realizing that was the oath of the allegiance to the form of government, and acknowledging the limitations that were placed upon them. Consequently, what we're also finding out is the Post Academy does not teach anything related to the Constitution, only along the lines of what the Supreme Court has actually done, elevating the Supreme Court to an unconstitutional level, believing that they are nothing more than they are the ultimate Politburo. So, there is abuse going on. I think a lot of it, to be honest with you, relates to the fact that, because of the fact that if law enforcement officers are never taught their limitations and understanding of the Constitution in the mind of the founders and why they were created, and the servant and versus the master kind of a thing, which people hate talking about, these things are all very, very important. And I think as men, as me being a man and you being a man and the law enforcement officers that we talk to that are men or women, we need to come to the table. And I want to be able to offer a perspective and have them understand truly what liberty-minded citizen thinks like. Not to call them dumb or school them or anything like that. It's just like, hey, let's get together, let's reason together. The reason why we mentioned the Constitution, and the cop can say, oh, well, why do you do this? Well, this is easy. Well, Article 1, Section 8 says this, or, the duty of the state constitution or the jurisdictional differences or something like that. So I think the communication is absolutely key. Education is certainly a part of that. And education, I mean going both ways, sharing the concerns that law enforcement has while we're actually sharing the concerns that we have as Obama continues to call for the nationalization of police.
That I think bothers most people. I lived in southern Delaware for 4 years under a sheriff who was they have a constitutional sheriff's association, and he was their man of the year just a couple of years ago. And then just across the state line in the next county in Maryland was Sheriff Mike Lewis, who's people would be familiar with him as a regular talking head on Fox News. And Mike used to be a regular guest on my program there as well. And you've got a number of these people. You had Richard Mack, you had Joe Arpaio. They are basically the bulwark against that nationalization, and they are very much the people who are telling us local control, because you have accountability if you can vote a sheriff in or out and change those policies. Yet they're under attack constantly too as well, from what I can see.
Well, there's this demonization of anything that is good and righteous, and ultimately the root cause of the issue is much deeper than people realize. And law enforcement and the citizens and the growing animosity thereof. The end game for that is to be able to create civil unrest, to pin us against one another, to bring blood into the streets and whatever. But if you look at, I was just reading the Cloward and Piven strategy the other day, and I think I'm starting to share that with police officers to be able to help them understand that Obama supports this. And when you go into Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, you look at Bill Ayers and the Weather Underground. There was a book actually published years ago by the John Birch Society that talked about the war on cops. This is an effort to be able to undermine our free market, capitalist, free nation, and to be able to subvert it and reduce it to a socialist form of government, which obviously you and I know is happening. And the way to do that is through revolution. And all of the communist revolutionaries and totalitarians in history all have realized that in order to be able to do that, you have to agitate to rebellion. And this is what's extremely dangerous, is most people don't realize this.
Tom Muntz is a guest. Of course, he's a field coordinator for the John Birch Society in Idaho. We've got about 2 minutes to go. It's coming up on 8:56, 69 at our studios. When I was a boy growing up in a small town, our chief of police lived just a few doors up the street, and on rainy days, he would drive us, all of the kids in the neighborhood, to school, and also pick us up, too, or if it was really cold out. If you have a nationalized police force, you won't have any of that contact as well. I'm sure you'd recognize that, too.
Well, the danger, and not only that, we don't have the friendly cop driving down the road, and he just happens to be the neighbor or, the son that you happen to babysit or something like that. Nationalization, not only that, but, most people, regardless of political party, realize that our federal government is out of control to one degree or another. And if we have no accountability to our federal government, how do we think that we're going to have any accountability if we have a nationalized police force? I mean, these guys love being independent, and I think that it behooves us to be able to make sure that we make an outward effort to be able to support them. And that's why, if you haven't been visiting before and you're listening to me, you can expect a visit from me. I've actually created so much, I guess by traveling and stuff, I've actually been put on the radar by the Federal Bureau. So this is not something that's unusual. They want to know what my motive is.
Okay, for people very quickly here at the end of the segment who would like to get in touch with you, maybe they'd like to be involved with this project, what do they do?
Well, they can call me. My cell phone is on my website. You can go to jbs.org. You can hit contact, type in your zip code, and my name and email will come up. You can go to my Facebook page at Tom Munns. You can contact me at Munns Tom on Twitter, and just type in my name. I'm not the other Tom Munns on there is a Colorado newspaper guy. So I'm not him, but But yeah, I mean, I should be all over social media. You shouldn't have a hard time finding me. And obviously, they probably call you, and you can feel free to give them my phone number. I have no problem with that.
I was going to say the guy at the newspaper might be a liberal, but if he's at a small town weekly, maybe a conservative.
Right.
That was my experience. Hey, I want to thank you much for your time this morning and wish you good luck on the project.
Thanks for all you do.
Hey, thank you too. Tom Munn's joining us this morning, field coordinator for the John Birch Society in Idaho. And as he pointed out, if you go to the website, John Birch Society website, jbs.org, and if you just put in your zip code, you'll get all of his contact information. Very, very important topic. How can we better support law enforcement? And in other words, protect them from the assault they're under in places such as Ferguson, Missouri, Baltimore, Maryland, and now in a tiny Texas suburb. Maybe not that tiny. It is Texas, and it is a suburb, but you know what I mean. It could come to any town, anywhere near you. We have one more hour of the program coming up. Bill Colley with you on Top Story, News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And there is an effort underway to change the way we teach history in our schools. We'll talk about that in a few minutes, another effort to try and eliminate the past, if you will, and all of our traditions. News is next, though, at 9 o'clock from Fox. Yes, and I was out in the, our air conditioning has gotten to the point here in the building where, in order to protect the on-air end of the building, that is, from the other end of the building where they make all the money, where the sales folks actually are housed, we have actually closed the door between the two sections of the building, which in some ways, I mean, it's an isolation ward now, but it gives me a great deal more freedom in this hour. You'd like to think that anyway, if they can't come crashing through the doors and make you stop what you're talking about. We have a caller right off the top of the hour with us. Not sure what's on the caller's mind. We had, of course, a news break here in the middle of things, but the caller may be looking to comment on something from earlier in the show. You're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story.
Bill, I wanted to comment on something earlier, but I couldn't get to a phone while I was loading cows.
Ah, well, hey, that's a hard work. You've got to take care of that first.
You know, and I hope you give me just a second to vent, because this is getting very, very disturbing. And I watched the news this morning, and they show that scene again about the young girl getting pushed down, and they only show enough to make it look bad, but they never tell the whole story. And then the family's on there talking about how they want racial laws. This is getting way out of hand.
And yet they will find people who will agree with them, and it may go all the way up to the White House.
But the story is much bigger. The kids crashed a private party in a private pool.
And they wouldn't leave.
Doing very unruly things. The cops got there, and they were being mouthy and everything else. One of the kids grabbed the cop's belt. That's why he pulled his gun. And now the guy quit his job and is in hiding because he's got death threats. I want somebody from the left that's pushing these agendas. Please tell me one scenario where the cops have done this, that they haven't shown up because they were called there, because the kids involved were doing something illegal. If they weren't doing anything illegal, they wouldn't be there.
Thank you.
It's ridiculous.
Well said. Well said. I, again, absolutely in agreement with you. Again, the police would not have been there had these children not been naughty. Does that answer our question? I guess it does, or it should. You're up next. You're on the air on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com.
Good morning, Bill.
Yes.
Can I share my pitbull experience with you? I'm 62. I live in Burley. My son brought one home, and I had no use for them. I thought, man, they're just an evil dog. I thought they all ought to be put to sleep. And I can tell you, Bill, we've raised maybe a dozen of them over the last 25 years, rescued them mostly, but 95% of the dog it's up to the owner. I mean, they are a marvelous companion. It's just...
Well, I'll tell you what. I have a friend who's got 3 of them living in his house. They're all rescues. In fact, he was on the air with us a couple of weeks ago, or a few weeks back, talking about Second Amendment issues. He's the son of the actor Ned Beatty, And Doug is a former coworker, and yeah, he has 3 of them, all rescued from the pound.
Yeah, so I understand. I see the people walking around Burley, and it's a manly thing. They got the dog pulling them, and it's just horrible to see that, because it's a dumb owner, and it's just unfortunate. I understand I see it too, but I just wanted to tell you there are good dogs and there are bad dogs, and more likely bad owners. So thanks for letting me talk.
Yes, far more bad owners than there are bad dogs. I think we can all agree on that. You're up next at 9:10. You're on the air on News Radio 1310 KLIX.
There's no doubt that there is a war on cops. There are agitators out there being hired, like at Ferguson, to try to agitate the situation into something worse than what it already is. There was one place where a bunch of hired agitators were getting in the face of one male cop, and they got him so upset that he was cussing and threatening, and there was one woman cop saw this. She went over and grabbed this cop by the arm and pulled him away from there and stopped the situation from escalating. What it is there's a lot of things that's being done against these cops, and these cops need, if they will police themselves in that same way, they can settle a lot of these things. I mean, I'm not putting down the cops in any way. I know that there is a war against them, but it's just a suggestion that these cops need to police themselves a little better the way this woman did.
I thank you much for the call. There's an old, there was a football game back in the late 1960s with the Green Bay Packers and I believe Dallas Cowboys. And after scoring a touchdown, Jim Taylor wanted to go after one of the Cowboys. I think that's the story. And Bart Starr ran over and kind of ran alongside him and just did not allow him to get around him to get him off the field to calm him down. But look, I have often heard so many criticisms. Even a lot of police officers and law enforcers I know will say, well, maybe he shouldn't have pulled the gun, or maybe you shouldn't shout back. Put yourself in that, and then we hear, but they're trained. I tell you what, they are human beings just like you are, just like I am. And I always give them a little bit of slack for that particular reason. You wouldn't want their job. Most people certainly wouldn't want that job. You're up next. You're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story at 9:13.
I don't want to hear the same outrage also for that millionaire son in Texas that killed 2 people while drunk driving.
Are you gonna hang up now?
No. Let me finish.
Well, because usually you just spout off and then click. You don't even want to stick around and have a serious debate on anything because obviously you don't have an ability to win.
No, let me talk.
The topic right now is police officers. Why are we talking about some rich guy hitting some kid?
No, let me finish.
It may be a topic for another day, but it's not the topic right now.
Okay, fat boy, thank you.
Yes, what'd I tell you? You paid for the guy's college education. All of you did. And so he can have some job, which is, considering where he went to school, the job is somewhat of a drop-off. But, hey, there you go. He wanted to make his point today. And, again, it's got nothing to do with whatever we're talking about. Thank you very, very much. How come you're not enraged by that? How do you know I wasn't? But that happened months ago, years ago. And it just went through court months ago. It's got nothing to do with what we're talking about today. If you're from California, is it genetic that you're a fool? I think the answer to that. You don't have to call in and assure me of that, please. I think we already know. 70 right now. In fact, going to be a nice day today. Not quite as sticky. Well, it won't be sticky, but not quite as hot as it was a couple of days ago. Looking for highs only in the 80s today. Sean Hannity last night was actually talking to one of the young men who were involved with this police officer in Texas. Of course, the kid brought along his lawyers, so when the kid started getting some serious questions, the lawyer, no. Shut up. Take a listen. This will be Sean Hannity on his program last night on Fox News.
You're getting pretty close into his grill, into his work zone, and you're being provocative while he is doing his job. Why did you do that?
Honestly, sir, I wasn't being provocative. I had no intention on charging the officer whatsoever, and I disagree with what he did. I honestly don't think he should have drew his weapon because I backed up immediately, not when he looked at me, but as soon as I got down there.
But let me ask you to get in, try and be a police officer, all right? You're in the middle of an arrest. It's obviously a very volatile situation that's evolved, and He's doing his job, and then out of the corner of his eye, he sees two guys maybe 2 feet away from him, behind him. Can you not see from his perspective that that is a dangerous position for him to be in? Adrian?
Okay, sir, I do see that, but can you answer this? In what point of the video was I ever behind the officer? You can clearly see
you're outside of his line of sight.
Side by side.
You're 3/4 of the way behind him.
Sir, if you look at the video from
so
the
that cop doesn't know if you're there to hurt him or not. That cop doesn't know.
I agree with that point. But everyone there was pleading with the officer not to hurt the little girl. They're pleading with the little girl to calm down so that he won't break her neck. And at that point, when he's in contact with the little girl, he's trying to force her face in the ground. His command to her is, get your face in the ground. That's not lawful for an officer to do.
A little girl, she was 14. When my daughter was 14, she was about 5'9" already, on her way to about 6 feet tall. A little girl. And he's trying to push her face in the dirt. Well, he actually told her, keep your face down. All right, so now the guy just somewhat contradicts himself. The police officer was giving her some instructions which she wasn't following. And so the lawyer comes jumping in there. You know what? I read somewhere, somebody said what we need to do is just send them the reparations checks. And then they won't have anything left to complain about. That was a comment made a few years ago. And I know this is not necessarily considered a racial issue, but they all are trying to turn it around into that. So for that reason, maybe if we just a one-time payout and then it's all over with, right? Then we won't have to hear these complaints any longer that someone else is being mean to you and that all you were doing was breaking the law. Oh, wait a minute. That might be it. You're up next with Bill Colley, 917-70, and you're on the air.
Hello, Bill. This is Pat. And, this morning I was watching on Fox News, and they were saying that that officer just came from 2 suicides. One of them, the fellow had committed suicide in front of his children, and they both were serious situations. And he just got off of those 2 situations. The next thing you know, he's dumped in the middle of a bunch of teenagers having a brawl. And I'm sure he was already limited out on his abilities to think straight sometimes. And in the situation he was at, he had mob rule there for a little while.
I had an old girlfriend in college, and it's a good thing it didn't work out because she, over the years, has developed this attitude about police officers. They're all bad, they're this and that. But on the other hand, she would never acknowledge that she has an anger management issue in her neighborhood, and that's why the police are often in her neighborhood, and that's why they've sometimes taken her away downtown for a few hours to cool off. Why is it some people always have issues with law enforcement, but yet you meet other people who are 70, 80, 90 years old and they've never had any? The answer might be related more in the people who have the trouble than in the law enforcer.
Well, I had 2 sons that are law officers for years, and they both got out of it. And it's a very stressful situation that they're under, a lot of stress all the time, and very little thank you for it. And everybody's out, it seems like, to make the officer being the bad guy when they're just trying to do what they're trained to do.
Yeah, when they came into the pool party and said, you got to get out of here, what you do is you leave. You don't stand there and start spitting and arguing. You leave. And if you don't leave, you may be taken away. They may take you out of there forcibly. I don't know why that can't compute with a lot of these people on the other side of the equation.
Well, it seems like society has gotten to the point where we have no respect for law and order. It seems like everybody thinks they can just do whatever they darn well please, and they have no respect for other people's property, or even the law. It just seems like something's gone really awry in our society.
Yeah, a long time ago, too. I thank you for the call. Victor Davis Hanson, who's a historian at the Hoover Institute at Stanford University, and you see him a lot on these documentaries on History Channel and various places. But he had a piece a few weeks ago saying that when a culture is dead, and that is when, number one, people don't want to pay the taxes to support it any longer, and number two, when there's no longer any respect for the law. And we probably have reached both of those points. We've got more coming up. Speaking of Victor Davis Hanson, great writer, he wrote about his thoughts about World War II today. Happened to see that. This week we're celebrating some anniversaries related to that. Details on that, as well as, speaking of history, what we're not teaching kids any longer. Had a note this morning when I got up from a friend of mine, and he was sharing that, well, they have a big family. They raised, I think, 11 of their own kids, and then they had a number of foster children who lived in their home. The children have all done very well. One of them became the lobbyist for the American Legion on Capitol Hill. He was on the program with us, in fact, a few months ago, and he's since moved on into another role in Washington. And he has a daughter who's dating the executive editor at IJ Review. The guy used to be the star at BuzzFeed. So they're a pretty well-adjusted, well-attuned family. They homeschool their children. Children are all brilliant. But some of his kids' friends were over at the house the other day, 4 of them. They've all graduated recently from local high schools. And he was sharing with me, they got talking about war, because some of his children actually served in Iraq. And he was saying, well, he mentioned who won World War II. None of the kids knew. These were high school graduates. They didn't know. When he asked why they didn't know, they said, we haven't been taught that. Isn't that a little alarming? 70, it's 9:25. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. 736-0300 if you'd like to join the program this morning. And you're up next. You're on the air.
Yeah, Bill, I had called in before you brought up the 11 kids. It's kind of a weird coincidence because my wife and I were both married before, and then we got married, and she had 5, I had 4, and then we had 2. And if my math is correct, we've got 11. And so I have 11 kids and 13 grandchildren, 1 on the way, make 14. And I'm going to tell you, when the kids don't respect law and order, it's because dad and mom didn't do anything right much. It ain't easy being a parent. It's a hell of a lot of work.
Yeah.
But you better get your butt up and start doing something, because this is the key to it. The social breakdown is breaking down because the parents aren't doing their job, whether or not they're afraid or they're lazy or whatever the hell it is. You just have to find your stride, man, and do your job, because your society starts to break down and you say, well, I have a safe neighborhood. Well, if things continue the way they are, you may not. You may not have a safe neighborhood. And then you say, well, hell, this stuff's coming home to roost. And it will. So we have to do our best, and hopefully people can find their stride, because without some sort of diligence towards doing the right thing, this country's cooked.
Well, and thank you for the call. We're on our 4th generation right now of children, many of whom have basically raised themselves. I think back, it was hard enough raising 1. I think back to some of the things I used to do with my daughter when she was little, and at the time I didn't think that they were really unique or unusual, but they gave her a good round vision, I think, of what life is all about. But one of them I was thinking about the other day, these 2 escaped convicts may well be running around the Adirondack mountain range back in New York. When she was a little girl, I would take her up to the mountains camping, because I don't think many daughters get to go with their dads and do stuff like that. And we would rent a cabin, and what we would do is we'd do some shopping during the day, and then we'd have our dinner. I'd build an open fire in a pit outside, and we'd cook our dinner and have our dinner, and then there was a porch swing, and we used to sit on that porch swing. And I would sit there and I would talk with her after dinner, and as the fire was burning well into the evening and the sun would set, and she would eventually just fall asleep. And I think that she got so much out of that. And there were so many, and I noticed in those moments, we didn't talk always as father and daughter. We talked one-to-one about various concerns and things in life. And she's grown up with an ability to still do that. Of course, I used to take her to the horse track, too. We didn't bet, though. I mean, I didn't want her to get into that habit, but I used to take her to Saratoga, and we'd go watch the horses run. But there were all sorts of unusual things like that she got exposed to when she was a child, but she also got exposed to the notion that you go to church every Sunday. There are little things like that I try to say, hey, this is important, and here's why it is. I remember she was about 6 years old, and I was trying to explain to her why we had to go to church, and I was exasperated, and finally I said, if we don't go, God's not going to like it very much. And she sat in the back seat of the car, folded her arms, scowled, and looked at me, and she said, well, he's not the boss of me. We had a conversation after that, too. 9:28. We have a temperature of 70. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Of course, you can hear us online anywhere all over the world at newsradio1310.com. There's a couple of pieces today, one in the Wall Street Journal, one at the Daily Signal about the new American history curriculum. And if I get a couple of minutes in the next segment, maybe I can mention this. Here you go again. We're going to wipe away everything that happened in the past so we can address all of those victims out there, because somebody that looked like me 300 years ago may have been mean to someone who looked like you 300 years ago. So therefore, we have to address and change the way we teach American history. Workers of the world unite. Well, we just dropped back to 69, but quickly back to 70. Nice warm morning throughout the Magic Valley. Hope you can stick around. One more half hour of the program is just ahead. So if your children are learning any history at school any longer, they may be learning an entirely different history than you learned in the next few years. Opinion column, Wonderland, Daniel Henniger at the Wall Street Journal, Bye-Bye American History. The memory hole, a creation of George Orwell's novel 1984, was a mechanism for separating society's disapproved of ideas from its dominant ideas. The unfavored ideas disappeared, Orwell wrote, on a current of warm air. In the U.S., the memory sorting machine may be the College Board's final revision of the Advanced Placement Examination for U.S. History, to be released later this summer. Last week, 56 professors, that would read Marxist-Leninist, right, and historians published a petition on the website of the National Association of Scholars urging opposition to the College Board's framework. So even these people are upset. Pushback against the new AP U.S. history curriculum has also emerged in Texas, Colorado, Tennessee, Nebraska, North Carolina, Oklahoma, and Georgia. The framework is explained into concepts, codings, and even Roman numerals. Let me just give you a little taste of what he's writing about here. I'll have to flip the page. Sometimes when you print these pages out, they tend to be, they adhere to each other. A little bit like a legal clause, I guess, is what you'd say. At one point, the curriculum's authors say, quote, debate and disagreement are central to the discipline of history, and thus to AP U.S. history as well. Unquote. This statement is phenomenally disingenuous. From key concept 1.3, quote, many Europeans developed a belief in white superiority to justify their subjugation of African and American Indians, using several different rationales, unquote. And the writer says, pity the high school or college student who stands up in class and decides to challenge that. Well, yeah. Oh, you must be one of those racist bigots. You have a view that's different from mine. 9:35, 70. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. The telephone number is 736-0300, and you're on the air.
Bill, I'm breaking the rules.
Keep it quick.
Okay. I have a lot of cop friends and everything else, and my kids grew up and never got into trouble. And when they got older, I told my daughter one time, I says, you guys never got into trouble because we were your parents, not your friends. And she says, oh, I'd never try to get in trouble because you'd know about it before I got home. So, I mean, that's what needs to be done. These parents that are up there screaming and yelling for justice should be parading their kids in front with a sign says, I broke the law and got caught.
You know what? That may be a what you'd call a deterrent. A little bit of humiliation creates some social pressure. That has worked in the past. Thanks for the call. The stocks, they used to call it in the old days. If you did something wrong, they put you out in the stocks. Everybody walked by, laughed at you, jeered at you, and you felt embarrassed. And it was a good way to modify your behavior. It often worked. It usually worked, from what I understand, reading through history. We don't do enough of that. You know, my old man, of course, with a police chief living just up the street, and they were the best of friends for a long time. I can remember the police chief had been with the local parks department, and he'd been running patrols at the lake. And he came to my dad and said, I've just been hired as police chief. Why don't you take my job? I told them at the park commission about you, and you can start tonight. And he hadn't even filled out an application. And my dad said, oh, okay, I need the money, sure. He said, but I don't have a gun. So Lauren, the police chief, handed my dad a gun and said, here, use mine. Can you imagine that happening today? Well, anyway, if we got in trouble around town, and if Mr. Sweet, the police chief, saw us, we knew Mom and Dad were going to know about it, and we knew that meant a paddling. You're up next. It's 9:38. You're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX.
Hi, Bill. I just wanted to make a comment about the AP History exam being rewritten. The president of the College Board who is rewriting that is David Coleman, who was the architect of Common Core.
Oh, that makes sense.
And then after he established Common Core, moved on and became president of the College Board. And so this is all very much orchestrated. It's starting with the AP History, but the College Board is also over all the AP exams. So you're going to see changes in the AP English, any of the AP exams, like I said. Parents need to wake up and understand what is happening with education. It is fundamentally being changed. And the argument is that Common Core is just standards, that we shouldn't be concerned about it, but it's far, far more than just standards. And the standards may seem benign, but we need to understand what makes up the whole structure of Common Core, and standards is just one pillar of that. And so I appreciate you bringing that to awareness, and it's something that we need to not let go to sleep. We need to keep looking at this and asking questions and getting it repealed in Idaho.
Hey, thank you very much. And of course, it's indoctrination, is what she's pointing out. This is a passage in the document. Students should explore the lives of working people and the relationships among social classes, racial and ethnic groups, and men and women, including the availability of land and labor, national and international economic developments, and the role of government support and regulation. Oh, so yes, this evil country of ours, founded by those evil people and all of the evil things we've done around the world, such as defeating Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, and then bringing an end to the Soviet Union and its evil empire and its subjugation of Eastern Europe. Oh, what evil people we are. 20 minutes away from 10 o'clock. Bill Colley with you. That, by the way, that quote came out of the Daily Signal. I highly recommend you sign up for the Daily Signal's daily email. We've got more coming up in a couple of minutes. Judge Napolitano has a view of this new, it's not the Patriot Act any longer. They've changed the name, but he says it's the same thing. I want to share something quickly about that, too, as well. Judge Andrew Napolitano has a warning today in his column at the Washington Times. We no longer have a Patriot Act. I think it's called the USA Freedom Act, which is like if you've got a car that doesn't run, that it's blue, and you'd like to sell it, so you go out and you paint it red, and then you tell all the prospective buyers, hey, it's a different car. He says, don't buy their argument. I know for the people that critically challenged liberals who listen, critically thinking challenged, they may not get that analogy. But I just wanted to throw that out there. 944, 71. Hey, also, a headline at the Drudge Report says Paul Ryan snaps. He was being questioned about the trade bill, giving President Obama sweeping powers. Did you know it is said that it will allow President Obama to open the floodgates to immigration in this country with no control by anyone else? Oh, very nice. Wall Street Journal today denies that's actually part of it, but that was part of the WikiLeaks dump. Wall Street Journal wants, of course, unfettered immigration because the rich boys who read that newspaper want the cheapest labor they can find. But Paul Ryan put his foot in his mouth, telling the reporter that you can read the law after we pass it. Oops, sound familiar? Yeah, and he says he's a Republican. Well, that's the thing. Republicans and Democrats got together and they changed the rules of the NSA spying program. You may remember, including Mike Lee, Republican of Utah and supposed hero of the Tea Party movement. At least if you read, that he's always identified as Tea Party senator. Judge Napolitano, in reality, nothing has changed. Under the Patriot Act, the NSA had access and possessed digital versions. What's a digital virgin? Well, she spends so much time on the computer she can't get out and do anything else. Digital versions of the content of all telephone conversations, emails, and text messages sent between and among all people in America since 2009. Under the Freedom Act, USA Freedom Act, it has the same. The USA Freedom Act changes slightly the mechanisms, but it does not change, he says, the nature of the program. Under the Patriot Act, the NSA installed computers in every main switching station of every telecom carrier and internet service provider in the country. It did this by getting Congress to immunize the carriers and providers from liability. In order to operate its computers at these facilities, the NSA placed its own computer analyst physically at those computers 24/7. It then went to the U.S. Foreign Intelligence Service Act, that is, the FISA court, and asked for search warrants directing the telecoms and internet providers to make available to it all of the identifying metadata. That is, the times, locations, durations, email addresses, and telephone numbers used for all callers and email users in a given zip code or area code on a computer list. The first document revealed by Edward Snowden, he's the guy who gave all of these documents to WikiLeaks, 2 years ago was a FISA court search warrant directed to Verizon, ordering it to make available to the NSA agents the metadata of all of its customers, more than 113 million at the time. That includes me. Under the USA Freedom Act, which is the new one, the NSA computers remain at the carriers and service providers' switching offices, but the computer analysts return to their own offices instead of being housed at the private companies. And from there, they operate remotely the same computers they were operating directly in the Patriot Act days. How does that change anything? Well, when Rand Paul made some objections, the first thing his fellow Republicans did is went out and said, Rand Paul can't be trusted. No. We always liked him until now. But we really need to know everything you're doing. And pay no attention to Jade Helm. No, we would never do that. Pay no attention to the IRS intimidating people. No, never. Why, we're only doing it to keep you safe. Who's a bigger threat? We've heard just the other day that ISIS may have collected enough material to make a dirty bomb. That is, for 10, 20 block radius spread radioactive material if they get their hands on it. Now, getting it here might be more difficult for them. On the other hand, the United States possesses, well, we were told after the end of the Cold War, we reduced the number of warheads down to, about 3,000? And they're much more devastating than a dirty bomb. And right now, if they wanted to, the United States government could fan out across this country and cause you a lot more problems than ISIS could ever do. Now, I know people out there love their country. I do too. I love the people in many cases who serve the country, who serve it whether in the military or in law enforcement. They're good people. I love a lot of people who actually work in government because, they wanted a decent retirement and it was one of the few jobs that offered that. So they took that offer. And they're still decent people, but I dislike the people in government who see this as an opportunity to enhance my own personal power. And I can get away with it, because I can. Whether they be at the IRS or any one of these other government agencies. And you know what? There are enough of them there now that they can't be trusted. Why do you think they're rewriting the history curriculum? Why do you think they're rewriting the entire education system through Common Core? Why do you think they're practicing how to deal with domestic disturbances? These are all questions that I think are worthwhile asking. And I think if we don't answer them, then we're just going to be sitting back and waiting for the day they build a corral around us and then suddenly say, aha, you're not getting out of here. I think we have to always be cognizant of that. Now, people are saying it might be an overreaction. Why not be vigilant just in case? Just in case. Because, you know what? I see enough people in government who are there to serve basically just themselves. And some of the people they serve as well, who funnel all the campaign cash, they may not dislike me, but if my interests collide with theirs, their interests are going to win, always. That's how that works. Coming up, Mike Gallagher, brought to you exclusively by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls. The telephone number, 736-6563. Thank you very much. Hey, just talking a little bit about the changes that we've seen in our lifetimes in this country. Some of them, obviously, for the good. I remember being in high school and we got a microwave oven in our home, and I thought, now we are really a modern family. And then you look at all of the developments that came after that, and you're like, wow, microwave oven, that's quaint. But we all are aware that we've lost something when it comes to perhaps the way we used to live. And that people nowadays, they just, the whole culture is just fraying off into different directions. You see it in entertainment. You don't have mass audiences anymore. We talk about patriotism, and you have people out there who just simply mock it. They don't believe in it. They don't believe in the country any longer. Yet they're still collecting the checks every week. They're still showing up at social services. Well, I saw something very heartwarming in the Wall Street Journal. And the hometown of John Wayne, where he was born. He only lived there until he was 2 years old. Winterset, Iowa. When I was driving to Idaho in December, I passed through there, or near there. It's not far off of Route 80, and There's a museum that has been built in his honor there, and now they have erected a large statue of the man. And really, the writer, for many, many years, Wayne was considered, he's just a jingoistic American actor with no talent and loudmouth, et cetera, et cetera. Certain folks just hated him because they thought he represented an imperial America and an America that was out just to slaughter indigenous peoples and the like. But the writer is a movie reviewer and says John Wayne was a considerably different character. He gave an interview in 1957 where he said, "I'm Duke Morrison. John Wayne is just a character." And I know a lot about him because I occupy that character in movies. But he said there's a huge difference between Duke Morrison and John Wayne. But get this. John Wayne, The Life and Legend is a book that was written last year. The author notes that from 1949, for 25 out of the next 26 years, Wayne was among the top 10 box office stars. In the latest Harris poll, Wayne was number 2 on a list of America's favorite movie stars. Now, he's been dead for 36 years. The only star who has appeared in the top 10 every year since 1994 when the poll began. So even 15 years after his death, he's been appearing in that top 10 every year that they've been taking this survey. And, it tells you people are looking for something. There's a yearning. The writer says Wayne was a physical force who could erupt in fury, but he also projected an unusual gentility and an acute sense of propriety. It was as if he were uniting European-style honor and etiquette with American-style brashness. Wayne's characters are often scarred, set apart from common humanity. But in the end, many of his characters who start out angry and embittered, think about the movie The Searchers, end up having a change of heart, end up realizing that perhaps... So people are even reappraising his acting ability. They're now realizing he was a much better actor than he was given credit for. I saw The Shootist just a couple of months ago. I still love that. It was the very last movie appearance that he made. And then, of course, he came down with a cancer that ended up killing him a few years after that movie was finished. But people still are drawn and attracted to this man because he represents, his characters on screen represent the American ideal. I saw the remake not long ago of True Grit. And it only made me think, what was wrong with the original? Nothing against the guy in the remake. But when I sit back and I watch the original and then Rooster Cogburn, which was the follow-up, and some of the other pictures that he made, just larger than life. And those are the Americans when I was a kid growing up. And I would be downtown with my dad, and we would run into men who had marched across Europe or island hopped across the Pacific, or who just led good and decent lives in town. They were so much more like him than so many people I meet today. They were a lot like that character that he played. And I don't know that we can ever recapture it. But you know what? I still have hope. God willing, if the creek don't rise, I'm back in the seat tomorrow, Friday, between 8 and 10 o'clock in the morning. Rush Limbaugh's show. The Wheel of Fortune, whoever the guest host is today, is coming up next following news at 10 o'clock right here on KLIX.